Exactly. Now, nobody likes a custom waypoint marker on a game map that doesn't disappear when you get to the location you marked. If you've marked something on the map, it should stand to reason that when you're there, you don't need to know where it is anymore. And if you do need to know where it is, the frequency that you will need to keep knowing where it is significantly less than the frequency with which you would like the marker to disappear. Now that should be common knowledge. It's very annoying having to go into the map to turn the marker off every time you get to somewhere you marked. Now this is especially annoying in We Happy Few, but it's not so annoying that it's worth making a video about, so I just had to get it off my chest here. Unfortunately, that's the least of We Happy Few's problems, which we will talk about in a video coming up, because We Happy Few is so chuffing broken. Amazingly broken. So broken, it's funny, and then it's not funny, and then it's funny, and then it's not funny.
Lovely weather.
See you at the pub.
Nintendo hates feeling like shit's being stolen from it, which is ironic because it will happily steal money from anybody on YouTube who uploads a few seconds of a trailer for a Nintendo game regardless of fair use. For years, Nintendo's pushed harder than perhaps any other company against methods of obtaining games outside of the publisher's control, even when the publisher itself has made it quite clear it doesn't want people's money. For example, when Nintendo refused to bring Animal Crossing to Europe for 2 years after it came out in North America, it simultaneously cracked down on imports of the game, actively showing contempt for anybody who wanted to play a game when said game was, you know, available to buy. But if Nintendo hates imports, it absolutely loathes emulation, now more than ever since it happily sells emulated games in a little plastic box and overcharges for shitty software like Ice Climbers on its various digital storefronts. In case you didn't know, emulators let you run old games on your computer for free, be they for the Commodore 64, NES, Sega Genesis, PlayStation 2. Practically every console has an emulator that can run ROMs of games, allowing users access to an entire library of shit. Is it legal? No. Have people been doing it for years regardless? Yes. Does something being done for years make the thing okay? No. Is emulation okay regardless? Well, sometimes. But we'll get to that. 2 months ago, Nintendo put its foot down in a major way, filing a 27-page lawsuit against several emulation websites, including Love ROMs and Love Retro. The best part is where Nintendo, of all companies, accuses these websites of making, and I quote, ill-gotten gains. The Love ROMs website alone receives 17 million visitors each month, reads the lawsuit. Such visitors are drawn to the website by the widespread availability of free, unauthorized copies of Nintendo's video games and other highly valuable intellectual property. The resulting popularity of the defendants' Love ROMs and Love Retro websites has allowed defendants to reap substantial ill-gotten gains, including through donations and the sale of advertising on the Love ROMs and Love Retro websites. The crackdown against emulators has made news again this week thanks to one of the biggest websites in the scene, EmuParadise, closing its doors to ROMs. The website itself will remain as a retro celebration, but after almost 20 years of business, it will no longer provide any games. In a statement, EmuParadise said that the hassle did not outweigh the benefit.
It's not worth it for us to risk potentially disastrous consequences. I cannot in good conscience let's risk the futures of our team members who have contributed to the site through the years. We run EmuParadise for the love of retro games and for you to be able to revisit those good times. Unfortunately, it's not possible right now to do so in a way that makes everyone happy and keeps us out of trouble.
So again, let's admit that this shit ain't exactly legal and that a crackdown was only a matter of time. The industry at large still sees emulators strictly as piracy and still sees piracy strictly as a zero-sum game where every pirated copy is a copy of the game that didn't sell. Fallacious beliefs on the whole, but not beliefs that will ever go away. By all counts, EmuParadise ultimately did the right thing, as it's a fight you won't win against Nintendo when it decides to lawyer up. Nevertheless, as predictable as this outcome was, and as legally in the right as Nintendo is, I still think it's a shame that historically everything that's happened has been boiled down to this. In the past, not many game journalists out there have been allowed to so much as reference emulators in anything but negative terms, but their very existence has always made the paid alternatives look woefully overpriced. You can't beat free after all. I made a joke about Ice Climbers earlier, but I do mean it. More than $1 for a lot of old NES games is way too much. They've been found in those old 100-in-1 plug-and-play devices since forever, they've been sold and resold by their publishers, and they've been emulated for free for decades. They have practically no value, and yet routinely sell on official channels for more than many newer, better games on the market. If publishers had so much as tried to compete with piracy the way the music industry eventually did, offering more convenient methods of obtaining games at reasonable prices, I dare say emulation would have been nowhere near the problem it is today, if indeed it actually is a problem and not just a case of dragons jealously hoarding their gold. But that's never been the game industry's way. It doesn't want to compete, it would rather destroy, use legislation and litigation to drag the world back to the past where it resides, rather than embrace the future where we theoretically reside. I say theoretically because some of us are still with COMCAST. It's easier to hold back progress than to make progress, since the latter involves, well, making things, and heaven forfend a game industry create anything. By now we should have had an Amazon Prime or an iTunes or maybe even a Netflix for retro games. That's what we would have already seen from a competitive creative market, but companies like Nintendo have been too busy stamping out such ideas to think of a better way. We might finally get a really shit version of this concept with the Nintendo Online subscription coming up, but Nintendo's ridiculous drip feed approach to game releases won't make it particularly tantalizing. This is the company that, after all, released Pokemon Snap, a beloved N64 title that people gladly wanted to pay money for, on the Wii U eShop right before the Wii U officially died. And one can argue the thing was dead long before then. It had years prior to port the glorified ROM onto the glorified emulator and chose to wait until literally the last minute, when the Switch was dominating headlines, to finally do it. The Wii U was over, it was done, everyone had abandoned it, and that, Nintendo thought, was prime time. In the meantime, it was quicker and more convenient to just emulate the bastard. Or if you didn't mind the inconvenience, you could buy an N64 and a copy of the game on eBay, which would be perfectly legal, but nonetheless still won't put any money in Nintendo's pocket. The stock standard response to anybody complaining about the loss of emulators is, "Start paying for your games, you parasite." However, when companies like Nintendo start whining about not making money, while simultaneously making it hard or impossible to give them money, what exactly the fuck are you to do? The above example is one way in which you can legally obtain certain games, and is in fact the only way to do it for many titles. But as I just said, that does nothing to make Nintendo any cash, unless it would like to sue second-hand retailers as well. Not that I'd put it past them. And this is just for games that are available to purchase. Some games are rarities in the physical world and have no digital equivalent through official channels. For some games, emulation is genuinely the only viable, realistic way to access them. Take, for example, classic arcade games. Many of these, especially licensed titles, can be inaccessible to the public without a digital version. I, for example, love the old Aliens vs Predator arcade game, the Capcom one. But due to legal property rights bullshit, the chances of it ever appearing on Steam, PSN, Xbox Live or the eShop are practically zero. Fox owns the Aliens and Predator licenses, and Sega has the rights to publish Aliens games, but Capcom made the Aliens vs Predator arcade game, and that's an example of one of the more simple legal situations for a licensed title. Because one company owns the IP, the other has the rights to make games off said IP, and another had the rights to make a game in 1994, the whole thing is a tangled ball of string. It's not impossible for these games to eventually make their way to the modern world, but it's highly unlikely, and we've never had a clue we'll see AVP. It might have been more likely if the game, a beat-em-up classic I might add, had ever been ported to home systems, but it wasn't, so what are you to do? Well, you could purchase the arcade cabinet itself, and you can do that if you've got a little over $2,000 lying around, and you have the space for an entire full-size arcade machine. Maybe you have one of those two things. Both of them? That's a very small market, and yet again, a market in which the rights holders don't actually benefit. Then we have the games that shut down because the publisher decides to pull the plug on their servers and happily jettison the whole thing. Or the DRM that's forcing a game to make online checkups. What about when that stops working, meaning the only people who can play the game are, fittingly enough, fucking pirates? As this emphatic tweet states, "Motherfucker, I bought Scott Pilgrim when it came out, and I literally cannot play it in any legal capacity anymore. Shut up." Once again, evidenced examples of companies not wanting your money anymore, or worse, taking your money and rendering what you paid for unplayable, all while crying and yelling about those damn dirty pirates and then their ill-gotten gains from emulator sites. Fuck off, game industry. Fuck off with that. Nintendo is a company that, even when it does make retro games officially available, does things like deliberately understock them to drive up demand in a way that only makes money for fucking scalpers. The kind that gobbled up NES classics by the boatloads and then whacked them on eBay at an extortionate markup. Tell me how those gains aren't ill-gotten, Reggie. You tell me that, Reggie. Answer that and stay fashionable, Reggie. Reggie! Reggie? Why yes, I do have a Raspberry Pi with pretty much all the games on it, and no, I don't feel particularly bad about it. I could buy a copy of Jurassic Park on the Mega Drive, and if you can explain to me how that would make Sega or Blue Sky Software any money in 2018, by all means, I'll purchase a cartridge tomorrow. But ultimately, all this does is demonstrate once again how archival and preservation mean nothing to what should be an artistic medium. An artistic medium that doesn't give a shit about art. There are many games for which official obtainment is damn near impossible, or at the very least highly unreasonable. Hello, PT. There are many games that have been deliberately made unplayable by publishers, and there are many games, so many fucking games, that have never been and will never be re-released today officially on digital storefronts, therefore will not be in a position to make the creators and publishers of said games any fucking money anymore. But hey, EmuParadise won't be making any ill-gotten gains, so I guess the good guys won in the end. So, back to We Happy Few. It's a very broken game, I don't know if I mentioned that earlier. I did. But I wanted to talk about something else. I wanted to talk about what the writer Alex Epstein said in an interview that's been knocking about the place a bit recently. He said that We Happy Few was inspired by prescription drug culture. This idea that you shouldn't have to be sad, you can just pop a pill and fix it. Now, let me speak as someone with the old clinical depression and the old anxiety, who literally needs medicine to make his brain work properly. And look at me, this is me with my brain working properly. Can you imagine what it's like when it doesn't? So, with that in mind, rather than express my disgust at the uneducated and reckless and dangerous opinion that's often bandied about, this idea that, oh, nobody needs drugs, if you're depressed, just cheer up, right? That's bollocks. This idea that, as Epstein said, we don't value sadness. If you want to value sadness, right, here's a challenge, and I'm being quite serious about this. If they want to take me up on this, take me up on it. Compulsion? Send me your writer. Your writer and I will spend a week together in a location, could be a fancy hotel suite, I could get us a cabin, somewhere nice, somewhere away from prescription drug culture. I will spend a week with you, and I won't bring my medication. So you will enjoy a culture free of prescription drugs, okay? And just like me, when it all goes wrong and we're staring into the fucking dirt, just like me, you won't be able to walk away from it. And then we'll see how much you value sadness when the week is done. Okay? So you, go ahead, value your sadness. The rest of you, thank God for me, and I'll see you for that lovely week. You're gonna fucking hate it, mate.